We live, people. We are super duper live. Hopefully, y'all are doing super great out there in the world. Let me kind of adjust everything. Hopefully, y'all are doing good, and hopefully, I'm not coming in too loud. I do have my mic turned up a lot in comparison to yesterday's show. And again, I don't have anybody that has time and that would do things for free that can test these things with me. So today, we are going to have the microphone turned up and we will see how this turns out. I do have an incredible show laid out for you guys today. As you can see, checks, balances, and the oldest con. If you don't know what a con is when you are deceived by someone in a scheme and they get you to believe something that's not true is true and possibly get you to act on that false belief of the thing that you thought was true being on that belief that you thought it was true but it wasn't. And we are being conned. We are being conned by the oldest con in the American government, which is the con of the checks and balances structural, edit that the founders put into written, you know, legal the legal structure of our great nation. First, first and foremost, a little housekeeping, guys. Please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channels. Okay? The Ufulu Child channel and the Inner Storyteller channel. By the way, welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. It is your humblest of hosts, Soul Expression. Very happy to be with you today. And just remember, good people, if you are here, then you are indeed here for real conversations. Okay? We talk about natural law, we talk about religion, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great. We talk about money, we talk about anarchy, anarchism, we talk about culture, and we talk about how mankind is manipulated by forces that do not have our best interests at heart because they are completely evil. But we are not bashing faith systems here. Okay? We are simply examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories that we have the most faith in, the ones that we have the most stake in, and how those stories shape society. Okay? We are not calling people stupid or anything like that for having a religion. We are just looking at what those stories may be doing in their shaping of society. And that examination, of course, sits right alongside an honest look at the current human condition, which is slavery. Government is slavery. And the question that we have to keep coming back to is what could actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. Now, if any of that makes you a little uneasy, makes you a little angry, or just makes you uncomfortable in any way, please be assured and reassured that although you are 1000% encouraged to stay, my liege, you are, of course, welcome to leave. Only after you like the video. Okay? We need those likes, good people. We need those likes. A thumbs up goes a long way. Super duper long. I am I am so elated at today's um uh script or just the way that the concepts are laid out. I think they are logically sound and I think that you're in for a good show. You're in for a good show. So let's check it out. Let's see how what we got going on. And let me see. Let me turn this down a little bit so I'm not so loud in my own headphones. Check, check. Checky, checky. Check, check again. Check again. Okay. I like barely touched something and now I'm like way quieter in the mic. Um, don't know why, but we'll see. We'll see if that's. Did I have it all the way up here? Maybe I had it. No, I didn't. I was like right there. I don't know. I don't know, good people. Check, check. Oh, okay, I have to wait a second. I can't just turn the knob and immediately. Anyway, you guys don't care about that. We are here to talk about checks, balances, and the oldest con. Now, basically, what we are talking about, before I even get into my script here, the concept of checks and balances has to do with the structure of government that was established here during the genocide of the native indigenous peoples that were here. Okay, and shortly after, maybe the bulk of said genocide. The government that was established was a three-prong, right? We have three main branches: executive, judicial, and of course legislative. Legislative writes the laws, executive enforces the laws, and judicial interprets them. And this three-pronged system was supposed to be unlike anything ever created to a large degree, and it was supposed to be designed specifically to prevent a tyrannical government in America, to prevent the conversion of the republic into a tyrannical monarchy-esque entity. Of course, we are way far past that at this point in 2026, but it was the 1700s when the checks and balances were written into this established government. So, as far as I know, maybe it was the early 1800s, but regardless, the way that they went about it was not the most logical if the goal actually was to prevent tyranny. I no longer believe that the goal actually was to prevent tyranny. I think that Madison, Jefferson, Washington, I think these slavers knew a thing or two about a thing or two regarding how to manipulate the minds of the people that they knew were their subjects, or regarded as their subjects. And in order to manipulate them, they needed to make everything look and feel like freedom when it was in fact subtle or covert tyranny, right? There's overt tyranny where everything is done by force, and then there's covert tyranny where everything feels like it's your own idea and it's your own style and it's your own approach to solving problems, when in fact you are carefully placed within boundaries and only allowed to move with a degree of freedom within those boundaries. Um, so it's my personal belief. Now I don't know. This was hundreds of years ago. Okay, so I don't know, but it's my personal belief that these men knew exactly what they were doing and created a government that they knew was going to turn out tyrannical because they were a part of not only the Freemasonry religion, but they were also a part of a um, conglomerate of organizations that we now call secret societies that long before these men were born already had the goal of what we would call in a movie world domination. Okay, that's what we would call it in like a fictional tale. What they're actually going for is a centralized power that is completely unreachable by the subjects. And they knew that they were hundreds of years away from that goal even being realistic, that they needed a lot more people to have a lot more babies, that all of these changes had to happen first. But these organizations planned hundreds, if not thousands of years in advance, or maybe 1,000 years in advance. And so they broke up the plan and We were a lot smarter back then as far as mental capacity goes. So the people that were placed in prominent positions of power may have had foreknowledge of what the larger plan was and may have implemented a earlier stage of the one plan, their sort of one great work, as they call it, um, into place here in America, while other heads of state and heads of nation and heads of military and whatnot were doing other parts of the earlier plans in other parts of the world, in Africa, in a whole bunch of places that we're not going to touch in today's episode. Okay? So that's my general personal belief. I'm not here to prove that to you. I'm here to break down the logic as to how I got there. And we have a great show planned for you today. So check it out. Get your pens and pencils out. Make sure you argue with me in the comments. And let's get into it. Today, we are going to do something that makes people uncomfortable again. Not because the information I'm about to share is so obscure or difficult to find, but because it requires people to examine and maybe even challenge some of the most sacred containers in American civil life, in American civic understanding. We are going to look thoroughly at the concept of checks and balances. Okay, but not merely as a concept, mind you. Because the concept is fine. The idea that, if we're going to establish some sort of power, that power should be distributed and monitored, that's a sound idea. So we're not going to deconstruct and be mad at the pure concept of a separation of powers and checks and balances. We're going to look at checks and balances as they were actually designed, actually structured, and actually function in practice. Hope that's okay. And we're going to do so through the lens, of course, of natural law and basic logic. So, what we have to understand is this part of my argument, this part of my what did Officer Tatum say? Perceptualization is this is before we even get to talking about the documented corruption, the WikiLeaks material, the human rights organizational findings, the things that required somebody to go into prison or exile when exposed. This is before any of that. The argument I'm going to make does not require that stuff be discussed. Okay? Because the logical problem exists at the level of the design itself. And this is my domain. This is where I live. I live at, how was it designed? Oh, well, why wasn't this taken into consideration? Oh, well, they clearly missed this. That's where I live at. This is where I like to argue from. Okay? So, let's start by looking at the rhetorical premise of the entire checks and balances operation. Here's the rhetorical premise. Here is the story that most Americans were taught. The founders were brilliant students of history. They understood from studying the arc of human civilizations how dangerous concentrated power can become. They had just fought a war against exactly that danger in the form of the British Crown. And so, they designed something unprecedented in human history. A system of government with 3 separate branches, each one watching the other. Each one capable of limiting the powers of the others, so that no single entity could accumulate enough power to become tyrannical. They have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, right over here. I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but it's over here, right? Yeah, yeah, you can see it. Legislative, executive, judicial. Boom. And I can't tell. It doesn't look like it's super duper clear, but anyway, checks and balances, separation of powers. Now that story sounds right. It sorts immediately into the safe and wise drawer within one's inner storyteller. It has the texture of hard-won wisdom. It has the weight of historical consciousness. And it has the vocabulary of restraint and intelligence. But that might just be a little word magic. So let's follow the logic. Let's look at and break down the first logical problem that the system is checking itself. A government was established to prevent the concentration of power. But a government, by definition, in plain language, before we add any other analysis, is an institution that claims the legitimate monopoly on force over a population within a geographical boundary. That's just true. That's not conspiracy. That's all governments ever. That's all um, force-based leadership ever. That claim, the monopoly on force, is the concentration of power. Okay, it was concentrated on day one, good people, before the ink dried, before the first congressional meeting. The moment a government was established, power had been concentrated. The checks and balances are internal arrangements within that concentration. And you got to understand, I've had some of these conversations with people in my life, and the amount of re-explaining and slowing down and stopping people from responding too quickly to understand what I'm trying to say is enormous. I mean, you would be surprised how simple some of the concepts are that people's ears are like almost physically turned off from hearing. Like something like an entity within them perks up and stops their brain from listening to words that break down a simple concept like this in a way that they can respond without, trying to laugh it off or move on too quickly or whatever. Just, I don't really want to see it. I don't really want to look at it. So, the checks and balances are internal arrangements within the concentration of the power. They are not a limitation on the concentration of the power itself. The power being concentrated happened at the same time that a government was established. So, the checks and balances are a management structure for concentrated power. By definition, they are not a preventive measure against the concentration of power. Not by definition, at least. The three branches are not three separate powers checking each other from outside of each other's sphere of influence. They are not independent from each other. They are three departments of the same government deciding internally how to distribute its workflow. And the checker is selected by the checked. But again, people don't want to hear this. great patriotic minds, people that do care about America in a sentimental way, a lot of them cannot hear this information and actually process it in truth for what it is. For some reason, it seems. But the checker, again, in this system, is selected by the checked. The Supreme Court, right? The branch whose theoretical purpose is specifically to limit the power of other branches, is appointed by the executive branch. The Supreme Court justices are confirmed by the legislature. Do you see how this logically breaks down? The suspect of a crime, okay, a crime was committed behind closed doors. There's a suspect. The suspect is picking the jury and the judge. The institution being checked selects its own checker. In no other domain of honest reasoning would that qualify as a genuine constraint of power. People would laugh at it in any other context. We would call it what it is, which is a closed system managing its own appearance of accountability, aka a sham. Okay? It's a sham. Now, let's look at the second logical problem. Okay? We say that there are 3 branches, but it doesn't stop at 3, does it? Each branch, especially executive and legislative, each branch generates its own hierarchy of subsidiary power structures that extend the concentration of power further down and wider out. And each of those subsidiary powers generates further subdivision by also creating subsidiary powers of their own without any meaningful check or balance at any level below the top. The legislative branch produces committees, subcommittees, regulatory agencies, administrative bodies that write rules carrying the full force of law without going through the legislative process that supposedly legitimizes the law in America in the first place. You have the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and all of the case law regarding the FDA and all of the unanswered questions and unsolved crimes that surround that agency. We have the FCC. We have the SEC. We have the DEA. These agencies are not elected, right? The people that run these agencies, the people that are mid-level and the people that are at the bottom level of these agencies are not elected officials. They are appointed extensions of concentrated power, checking itself, writing binding rules for the population, its subjects, largely insulated from the accountability mechanisms the original structure claimed to provide, and still working 100% within the bounds or boundaries of the original structure. The judicial branch's inferior courts is a whole system, right? Inferior, I don't know how many of you are familiar with legalese, but when it comes to the word inferior, when you're talking about the court system, the word inferior means lower in the hierarchy than the Supreme Court or a state Supreme Court or what have you. There's the Supreme Court of the United States. Under that, there's the state Supreme Courts, and they go by many different names. Under that, you have the district federal courts, or maybe on the same level as the Supreme Court, you have the district courts. I think it depends on the state, but don't quote me on that. I am not a lawyer or giving legal advice at all. But under that, you have the state courts and civil that see the civil and the criminal actions like traffic court and family court and all of that. You have the inferior courts and that whole hierarchy of the court system. Inferior in the hierarchy or lower in the hierarchy is not equal to lesser in their power over individual lives. The lowest of the courts in many states can put you in a cage for a long time. And the inferior courts operate across the entire nation with enormous authority over people's freedoms, properties, and futures. Most cases, pardon me, never even reach the Supreme Court. The check that supposedly legitimizes the whole judicial apparatus. Right? This Supreme Court touches a tiny fraction of what the inferior courts actually do on any given day. And the executive branch is the most expansive of the three branches that has its own branches. The relationship between federal authority and state law enforcement is presented as a boundary protecting state sovereignty. In practice, it is a permeable membrane that dissolves anytime and as soon as federal interest is invoked for any reason or for no given reason. Okay? In practice, federal law enforcement and state law enforcement have no real boundary between them. The National Guard sits at the intersection of state and federal authority as far as police. Post 9/11, fusion centers share intelligence between federal agencies and local police departments. The history of federal intervention in state law enforcement from civil rights era and on shows how theoretical that boundary is when it actually matters and when large swaths of people in a given region are looking at the system and questioning things. And what you end up with is not three branches of government that are checking each other. What we actually have is a fractal of concentrated power, a fractal system, a fractal structure of concentrated power. Each branch generates its own subsidiary concentrations, which enrich and empower itself, and each of those generates further subdivisions, all of them traced back to the same source we call government, which means mind control. All of them exercise binding authority over the population, which it would not get, nor obtain, nor have, nor be able to maintain without our obedience. This binding authority is very fragile and reliant on us being mind controlled. Because the population sits at the bottom of that vertical structure, that pyramid structure. Okay? With the vote as their primary formal mechanism of accountability. A mechanism that operates on a 4 to 6 year cycle for very significant races and selects between candidates pre-filtered by the same concentrated power. And voting from us, our voting, has no binding authority over the administrative state that actually governs daily life. We do have some say in some elections, at least it seems so, but we have no say in the binding authority over the administrative state that governs daily life. You know, I was watching Baron Coleman's podcast. I'm a huge fan of Baron Coleman. But you know, because you know, I like to watch certain people that I feel if they got certain key pieces of information early in their career, early in their adult life, they would have been a great freedom fighter, so to speak, a great member of the freedom community. Candace Owens is at the very top of that list for me. Baron Coleman is near the top of that list for me, and I love his show. But he just said something either last night or the night before on his show. It made me so mad. He said, uh, "The context doesn't matter," and I will, you know, preface this by saying you are not allowed to bash Baron Coleman in my comment section. Okay, you will get banned. But he said, you know, he said, I don't think people should be protesting ICE agents. If you don't like ICE, they're just doing their job. You know, if you don't like them, vote somebody else in office. That's what he said. You know, somebody find the clip. But I was like, man, you know, you make me mad, Baron. You make me mad, bro, because you're so right on so many things, but you're so wrong on this point. Um, but I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. But it basically shows that relationship that we have with this idea of authority, right? They're just doing their job. We have thousands of hours of abuse ICE agents are enacting. We have report after report on minors being sexually abused by ICE agents. We have um, news coverage even of brutality by ICE agents on what they call U.S. citizens, right? On subjects to the government that they're not supposed to be targeting for any sort of deportation operations or what have you. Yet these federal agents are seen in the eyes of somebody who thinks that they're freedom fighting, and he is to you know, a medium degree, I'll say. Barron is a freedom fighter to a medium degree. Okay, I think he's just wrong. He's just wrong on certain key facts that keep him in the direction of tyranny instead of in the direction of actual freedom, because his inner storyteller has locked into the freedom category tyranny. But regardless, um, we you know we have this knee jerk reaction to, oh well, if you just go through the government provided channels of changing what the government is doing, then the government will change in your favor. And it's like, no, that's just not true. And it's a very easy way to look away from the problem, to ignore and thereby enable evil to continue happening. And commenting on stuff that you just don't know about, right? So anyway, again, you're not allowed to say bad stuff about Baron Coleman or his show, the Real Baron podcast, I think. Um, we like Baron. We like Baron. Okay, here we go. Here is, now let's look. No, okay. This next section, this is the third logical problem. And my history buffs that may watch this show in the future, this is where you guys get to shine in my comment section. Okay, let's look at the third logical problem with the checks and balances system. The third logical problem in plain English is the founders said that this was a problem themselves. They said it themselves. Okay, those that wrote this system into law in America said that the result that we got was an issue that they were trying to prevent, or was an issue, period, in human history. This is where it gets very interesting, good people. And this is where it gets very uncomfortable for my Patriots out there. Shout out to the Patriots, not the football team. The founders were not ignorant of this problem. Okay, they described it in great detail in many writings, in documents that are still publicly available and still heavily cited as the philosophical and spiritual foundation of the system of government that they built. Case in point, the Federalist Papers are explicit about the danger of faction, about the danger of a government class that only serves its own interests. Our governing class only serves its own interests today. They wrote about how power, once concentrated, tends toward self-perpetuation. Madison specifically wrote that the system presupposes a virtuous citizenry and is wholly inadequate to govern of any to the government of any other. Let me read that again. The system presupposes a virtuous citizenry and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other kind of citizenry. Right? This means the checks and balances were never designed to function independently of the moral development of the population. They were designed as a supplement to the moral development of the subjects of this government. The assumption was that the people operating the system, the people born here, and then they grow up, and then they become the operators of the system. They take the controller from their grandpa, and they go, I got it from here, right? The people operating the system would be morally constrained by something deeper than the structure of the government that they're creating, right? By God, by the God of the Bible, okay? The one that apparently gave the law in Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29. I digress. That was a mean comment. I take that back. Sorry, Christians. Sorry. Because I don't want to be dismissive of, people's like whole life. But regardless, that God is the God that they thought would be the underlying, deeper, what compels them on the deepest level to constrain themselves and to not give in to temptation and to not give in to their lower desires while in positions of power or in general, right? They wanted to be constrained by conscience and principle and God's laws. But, that's just a story. It's just a story. And we can take that story as this is true, this was written from the heart, or we can take that story and say this was strategy and this was careful planning being put into motion. The moral development of the people was completely abandoned. And there's the whole problem of how it's extremely questionable that the people trying to write the most morally sound system of governance to ever exist were largely slavers. There's that whole question, right? Where was your moral development? The founders were not abolitionists, right? Hamilton included. The founders were not abolitionists. The institution replaced the inner work. And now, the supplement is being asked to do a job that it was never built to do alone, and predictably, visibly, documented on video and in leaked cables and in testimony of whistleblowers and everything else. It's failing at that job of preventing tyranny. So the question that the inner storyteller has to sit with is, did they not see this coming? Or did they see it clearly and built this anyway? Okay, we're just asking questions here. We're just asking questions. We don't, we're just asking the questions. Now, let's look at the laboratory they already had. Okay? There's one more dimension to the founders' sophistication that rarely really enters the conversation. Most of the prominent founders were not just theorists of power, they were practicing estate managers of one of the most psychologically demanding operations in American history or world history, which is the institution of chattel slavery. Again, estate managers of the institution or within the institution of chattel slavery. Managing a plantation at the scale that a lot of these founders' estates were, okay, and at the sophistication level required. It took a precise and applied understanding of human psychology, how to produce docility, how to produce the docile person, and how to maintain docility within that person, while giving them every reason in the world to resist whatever you're doing, to resist your existence itself, giving them all of the reasons to resist you and to resist what you say, resist what you think, resist what you do, right? While maintaining a level of docility within that person. That takes a lot. It takes a lot. You have to really know the ins and outs of the human mind. You have to test. You have to get it wrong a bunch of times. You have to be good at it. Right? You have to know how to use family structure, how to use social hierarchy, how to create economic dependency, how to create religious conditioning. Even if you lie about the word, right? You have to create a conditioning that touches their existential understanding of this plane of life. How to make people police each other, right? You can't do it on your own. And if there's just you and the overseers, and then there's a whole bunch of enslaved people, y'all can't do it alone either. You need people within the slave class willing to police other slaves. You have to know how to make the enslaved invest in the stability of the system of enslavement. Pardon me. And even more sophisticated, how to use gradations of privilege, gradients of privilege within the enslaved population to prevent unified resistance, because you wouldn't be able to handle unified resistance. You'd either have to kill them all before you died yourself, and then you don't have any slaves, or you would have to stop treating them as less than yourself and treat them as peers trying to run this estate. These estates were not amateur operations. They were multi-generational systems refined over decades, some over centuries, involving trust law, agricultural strategy, family customs, and the psychological management, all working together simultaneously. The men who designed these ways of life were not operating merely on instinct. They did not go into it without a plan. Most of them were not even born without their family already having a plan. They were operating on accumulated, transmitted knowledge about how human beings can be made to accept unacceptable conditions that they would never choose for themselves freely if given other better choices. So when those same men sat down with each other to design a government for a population of free white men, knowing that most of the free white men are also within the category of their subjects, and knowing that they needed the free white men to support being called the subjects of their government and defend the rules and regulations of this government, making them also subjects of it. When they sat down to design a government for a free population and wrote extensively about how that population needed to believe in its own freedom in order to remain governable, it is worth asking what body of knowledge they were truly drawing from. What they already knew about the gap between the story a population tells itself and its conditioning, and the actual condition that it is living inside. Again, what they already knew about the gap between the story a population tells itself about its condition and the actual condition it's living inside. This does not require any inference. It requires only reading what they built alongside knowing what they already knew how to build and how to maintain, i.e., slavery. There's also an esoteric angle that we should look at. And here's where we have to be a little more precise about the difference between what is documented and what is merely inferenced or concluded without proof. And what's documented is this. Many of the founders, were Freemasons and secret society members. Okay? I think pretty much all of them were Freemasons because the Masonic Lodge was so huge for elites at the time. Okay? Washington, Franklin, Hamilton, Madison, the list goes on. Freemasonry in the 18th century was not merely a social club. Okay? It was not a whole bunch of retirees getting together, looking through, books and talking about ancient books and ancient scrolls. It wasn't that. And complaining about work. It wasn't that. Right? It was a system of transmitted initiations, okay, and knowledge with roots in ancient philosophies, sacred geometry, and symmetry, right? What we broadly call esoteric knowledge. The architecture of Washington, D.C. reflects that knowledge very intentionally. The architecture of many, almost pretty much all cathedrals reflects that Freemasonic understanding. The symbolism on currency reflects it. A dollar bill has a billion symbols on it, pointing to Freemason, pointing to secret societies. I know y'all probably just heard that motorcycle. Pardon. I do my podcast in front of a lovely window. This history is not disputed by serious historians. Okay, it is simply not discussed in civics classes. I remember, as a matter of fact, when Candace Owens was talking about, I think she was talking about meeting her husband, George, Mr. Farmer, and she either said that he said this or somebody they were talking to said this, but basically she was talking about her conversion to Catholicism. And she said she was talking with a priest, and because George is so interested in the theological aspects to history, and she was saying that in the conversation with the priest and with George, that They basically were like, look, you don't even know that your country was founded by a bunch of Freemasons. You don't know how history actually comes together with the modern world, right? How we actually got here. And it's true, we largely don't know. We largely don't reflect on these things, and that's why esoteric knowledge is called occult knowledge. Occult, from the Latin root occultus, means hidden, hidden from the eye, right? Ocular eye, hidden from the eye. That's what occult means. So it's knowledge that is hidden. Occult doesn't mean knowledge that is demonic or knowledge that makes you be possessed as soon as you learn it. Right? There is no such thing as knowledge that as soon as you learn that the knowledge exists or as soon as you're exposed to the knowledge, it's the knowledge itself that corrupts you or something like that. There's no such knowledge. Do not be afraid of learning something because it's in the realm or general direction of the occult, right? You don't have to ritualize and practice everything that you learn, right? But you should not go, oh, I don't even want to know something that's relevant to how the country is run or relevant to how police do their thing or relevant to how much freedom I can exercise in my life because religion told me that if I even look over there, I'm just going to be possessed immediately. Right? Don't be scared of knowledge. What Freemasonry carried and what the initiatory traditions in general carried, which is documented, especially at its higher degrees, is a sophisticated understanding of how power, symbolism, and worldview interact in the human mind. How to use ritual to create identity around symbols and invest identity in institutions that bear said symbols or bear similar symbols. How to use language to shape the sorting function of the population that is under control's inner storytellers before they're old enough even to examine how their mind is being shaped, how their sorting function is working, and what things are being sorted where, and what associations with words are being made. What association with which words are being made, pardon me. They already knew how people will defend what they believe they participated in creating, even when they didn't really have any say in its design whatsoever. Okay, because you can give people, especially people who are kind of lazy, a little bit of participation or even illusory participation, and that will get sorted by the inner storyteller as real authentic participation. And then you can say someone's trying to take this away from you, someone's trying to take our democracy. Or whatever, and they will defend the system that they did not choose. Now, whether the founders applied that knowledge deliberately to the design of the American government is, of course, my personal belief and inference. It is not actually documented. No one wrote into the Federalist Papers, by the way, we know this is a sham, and we know that we just have to word things a certain way to make the white men that we want to make our subjects, go along with this, and to make their children's children's children keep going along with it long after we're gone. They didn't say that explicitly. So, whether this was deliberate or not, it's my conjecture. It's my speculation. However, it is a reasonable inference. It's an inference supported by the gap between what they wrote about the dangers of concentrated power and what they built. This thing so easily converted into the very type of direct control that they said they were against in a bunch of different ways. Right? What is not inference is the result, is the fruits of their designed government. whether we're talking about their design as far as how they designed it when they were alive, or the fruits of how we run their system now today. Because I know there's a bunch of people that when this video blows up, they'll be like typing away, actually, we don't have what they built. We have some sort of mix between socialist, capitalist, whatever, and what they built was supposed to be 100% capitalist, 100% states' rights, and 100% republic. Whatever. The fruits are not speculation. The fruits are real, they are here, and they are observable. The fruits is a population that defends its own subjugation and calls it freedom. That sorts the word Constitution into the liberty drawer and never examines what the institution the Constitution established actually does. People that will argue passionately for the system against anyone who questions it, including people whose lives are being actively harmed by that system right now, today, on video. And that is not something I think can be accidental. Whether it was deliberately designed into the government in 1770, whatever, 1789, or whatever, or it emerged from the moral limitations of the men who, could see the problem but not see themselves as the problem, the outcome is still the same. A self-reinforcing system of concentrated power protected by the people who are protecting the stories that their inner storyteller gives them is the fruit of this word magic. And you know what? Let's dive a little deeper into the word magic of it all. Okay? Yo, Theo, what's happening? What's happening? We talking about the checks and balances of this here government. I highly recommend, Mr. Theo, that you rewind to the beginning and check this out. This is one of my best shows for sure. So let's get into the word magic of it all. Okay? Checks and balances is one of the most successful pieces of word magic in American civic life, civic history. The phrase itself does a lot of work before any real examination can begin, right? We have checks and balances. Checks suggests some sort of restraint, some sort of boundary, preventive measure. Balances suggests we arrive at an equilibrium on common ground, right? Together, they produce a feeling, an emotional resonance of a system, a creation of some kind, a system in careful, measured control of itself. So, the inner storyteller will, of course, sort that into the safe drawer immediately in hearing checks and balances, or we have checks and balances for these reasons. You know what I'm saying? And the drawer closes before the logical analysis arrives. This is the same mechanism at work in every container that we've examined on this channel. The label does the filing in our brains for us. The container never gets really examined by most of the population. And in this case, checks and balances, in this case, the label has been reinforced by 12 years of compulsory schooling, every civics textbook, every politician who invokes it as a defense when the system is questioned, every well-meaning citizen who repeats it as proof that the founders thought of everything and were just so brilliant, by every bar card in court, You know, the founders did think of something. They were not stupid. They were not lazy. They were not intellectually inconsistent to a large degree. They thought of something. Okay. And by inconsistent, I mean they weren't nonsensical. Okay. They were obviously inconsistent in the way that I'm sort of breaking down the concept, but they were not inconsistent as far as they said one thing one day and then it was just nonsense the other day. Okay. So the founders thought of something, whether it was a solution or just a more sophisticated version of the same problem that they described is another question entirely. And it's a question worth asking. And here's my conclusion. Spit facts. We spit facts around here. Here's my conclusion. From a natural law perspective, from a natural law standpoint, the checks and balances framework commits a fundamental category error. It treats the problem of power concentration or power accumulation as a structural problem solvable through structural design. That's not logical or truth-based. Natural law locates the root of every systemic failure in the moral development of the individuals both operating the system and caught within the system. Again, our obedience is immoral. We are not good people for being obedient to evil people's orders. A structurally perfect system operated by morally underdeveloped people will produce the same outcomes as no system at all. Okay, again, a structurally perfect system operated by immoral or morally underdeveloped people will produce the same outcomes as no system at all. And in fact, I would say no system at all would lead to better outcomes. But that's my speculation. The structure becomes a costume. We have 3 branches of government. Don't you see my American flag costume? We're different than tyrannical governments. We have checks and balances. That becomes the story about the structure, which avoids examination of the mechanism of compliance actually manifest in the physical world. Natural law doesn't recognize the legitimacy of a claim to power based on a document written by men, ratified by men elected to public office, and enforced by men who wear a different costume and benefit from its authority. Legitimacy in natural law comes from alignment with moral principles, right? If you have the shared objective with the people around you to arrive at a world that is more free and less tyrannical, then you have to do no harm. You just have to. You have to do no harm. You cannot say, well, I have a legitimate cause. I want to, it's a better word, but I have a legitimate, you can't say, I have a legitimate cause to bring you harm if you don't follow my commands. And at the same time, do no harm, right? You have to respect the sovereignty of others, is the point. You have to be accountable for the full consequences of your choices and how they holistically affect the entire world and universe around you. Not just the choices visible, not just the consequences visible in your immediate circle, not just the consequences that arrive within your term of office. By that standard, the American government, not the idea of the American government, but the actual institution itself, has failed the test that it set for itself. Because we have arrived many years ago at complete tyranny. Many argue 2001 or maybe 2002 or so, after 9/11 happened and all of these new rules and all of these um, all the ways that the government really turned up the heat on the tyranny after the inside job of 9/11. Okay, the evidence was not hidden. It is not the product of fringe interpretation. The evidence is in many thousands of human rights reports by human rights organizations. It's in the court records. It's in hundreds of thousands of police brutality videos that um, nobody who needs to see them will ever be really held accountable for. And none of that required the system to be broken. It only required that the system work as designed. That concentrated power worked by concentrating power. Right? Concentrating power, protecting the concentrated power from accountability and genuinely producing a population conditioned to freedom, right? Instead, we're conditioning the population with the 12 years of compulsory schooling and religion and the religion of government itself and by word magic, like checks and balances, to pull away from freedom and to embrace tyranny and to embrace I can't live my life on my terms. I'm not mature. I'm not wise. I'm not smart. I need government to do it for me. To do this part, this part, this part, and this part for me. Right? The system defends the concentration of power as though its freedom was real. But a system is not living. A system gets no freedom. A system must operate within boundaries, or it is not the system in question. When in fact, human beings really, if you're a little loose with definitions here, really can't be bound to a system because we're made in the image of God, because we are all one, because all creation itself is all one, and our choices, both collective choices and individual choices, touch each and every one of the other ones, our other choices and the other people. You know, when we look at history for really what it is, we see the inner storyteller at work. We see how deeply we've adopted stories that normalize abuse and slavery, and how the association with the word slavery was twisted enough for us to call slavery freedom. Okay? We can't just have a comfortable examination of what's happening and how we're living our lives be what defines our lives. We have to look at we have to examine things in a way that costs something. We have to be willing to challenge our beliefs. Right? We have to look at the stories that require us to strip the labels off of these behaviors that we've been given and see them for what they really are. Right? Who wrote this story? And what is actually inside the story? And better yet, who do I want to be in a world where this story is all I have? Know what I'm saying? Oh, thanks, Theo. I appreciate that, brother. Theo says, I like your approach, bro. This needs many more ears. Yes, it does. I appreciate you, man. Uh, hopefully you all had a super duper wonderful time hanging out with your boy for this episode. We are over an hour and 10 minutes. That's amazing, but also a little bit jarring. So I'm going to not take too long with my outro. Please remember to like the video, guys. Like the video. Okay? Try to like the next one within the first 10 minutes, but like the video. Share the video. Comment like our boy Theo here. Okay? Do your thing. And today is Monday. We will definitely be back tomorrow, but I want to say next Monday we got John Bush coming. We got John Bush coming through, good people. He is a freedom fighter. He is the founder, I believe, of Exit and Build. If not the founder, then he's the head of it. He's the face of it. And we're gonna talk all things freedom. John Bush. He's a great guy. Great guy. By the way, German Bush, not British Bush. So he's not related to the Bush family that you know that come from the checks and balances. I hope you guys enjoyed my little thumbnail too. I really like that one. Of course, AI made it, so I don't take any credit for it, but I like what it came up with. You know. I think that's pretty much it. I will see you guys tomorrow for the next one. Thank you so very much. Like the video. Peace.